Hey guys, hey everybody, it's your buddy Choppadong here, coming at you on a Wednesday afternoon. We're going to talk main slate MLB DFS made easy by your friends at DFSArmy.com. One-stop shopping, all things daily fantasy sports. You know that I am the coach and contributor here that focuses on putting a fundamental routine in place to make you a better player each and every day. And that's what we're going to do. On the back end of this, though, I will dive into a tool that we'll feature, I guess, in today's video and show you a little bit of how we might incorporate that for cash builds. And maybe, because I've been getting some questions in terms of cash building, and maybe when the system of just going all in on ownership is not exactly working, or it's having a little bit of a cold spell, what pivots might you make, or what might you do to change things up, kind of freshen things up a little bit, or would you just stay the course? And the answer typically is stay the course. You guys, you're going to go through 4 of 7 days losing. You're going to go through 7 of 10 days losing. That's going to happen. The problem with DFS is people get too frustrated too quickly. They expect too much of themselves, and they bail on a system that was working perfectly fine, and then they leave that system, and then the system gets hot again, and then they miss out on what they should have had if they'd have just stayed put. So generally speaking, I don't like making changes, but if I were to make changes, I'll show you what I would do. So let's dive in. Let's knock the routine out for Wednesday's main slate, and then we'll dive into those tools and show you what we would do. Obviously, first things first, we're going to knock those early slate games out, and we're going to focus on the main. And the first thing we start with is pitching. As always, dive over into the chop shop, look for the biggest number possible. 598, Max Scherzer, duh. 516, 512, Trevor Rogers, Mike Minor, fine. But look at the difference. I want you to look at the difference over a substantial sample size. 598 dropping down to 516. That's 80 some odd points. And the difference is only $1,000. Is it worth that big of a drop off in K score, in strikeout upside, strikeout potential in the matchup today to save just $900? The answer is no. So Trevor Rogers probably should not be used unless you have other numbers telling you he's a safer bet than Max Scherzer, in your opinion. Boom. Go with your gut. But this research here that I use tells me no, it's not worth it. Now, to save $2,000, almost $3,000 though, to Mike Minor, now we're talking. Certainly, the difference between Trevor Rogers and Mike Minor is enough to save $2,000. Do you see how we're starting to use this K-score as an equalizer so that we can then go to money or go to Vegas odds or go to whatever and start breaking the tie? You're going to get a lesser caliber, lesser quality pitcher the lower you go in that K-score oftentimes, but you're also going to get a cheaper pitcher. And so sometimes it makes the difference. In your head, it can make it easier to tolerate the risk that you're taking because you're saving money and you're going for bats, okay? That's not necessarily a cash game attack method. That's more of a tournament pivot type of situation. I would say Max Scherzer's probably most likely the cash game pitcher tonight. He should carry the ownership. That should be the reason why. He's just a better pitcher on the slate. Again, you can maybe make a case for Trevor Rogers and whatnot, but at the same price and in this particular matchup, I would say the upside just isn't there for strikeouts. Night in and night out, if we ran this slate 100 times, let's say. Now, what we do is we flip-flop this on its head, and we look for the bigger W scores, and these are the vulnerable pitchers. These are the guys with the high whips and the high home runs per 9. These are the guys that have WOBA problems, giving up WOBA and facing a team that maybe hits for a high WOBA as a collective lineup. And those two things usually meet together with some fireworks. So Erod's in trouble, Ryu, Chi-Chi, Montas, King, they're all in trouble. They've got over a 650 W score. And although there is not a hard number for this, like I say 500 for K score, this over 650 with this many teams is probably something we should key on for stacks. Minnesota, Kansas City, Miami, Chicago, Houston probably should be in your stacking options tonight at some point, some form or another, okay? So now that you've got those couple of things knocked out, you've got some names to write down, you've got some teams to look into stacking, now you can go into those hot hitters. And you can do the same thing with the time frame in that you knock out those early games to where you're only dealing with hitters on the main slate. And now we're going to slide over here. We're going to cut that list down. We're going to take that 7-day WOBA number and we're going to go down. We're going to go to 400. Now, some people like the 2-week number. That's fine. I'm keying on the 7-day number because I really, really want those hot streak guys. If the guy's going to be hot for 2 weeks, I don't want to discover him on day 13 or day 14. I want to have discovered him back on day 7 and been riding his balls for about a week. You know what I'm saying? That's all I'm trying to do with this number. It works, it doesn't work. It's baseball, round ball, round bat, that whole deal. But if I've cut down to over 400 here and over 200 here, I've got, generally speaking, guys with over a 600 WOBA and ISO added together. They can have a higher ISO, they can have a higher WOBA, whatever, they still land on that list. And then I can come down here and focus on these guys. See, it's not too many names. I can focus on these guys when it comes to my lineup building. I want to make sure these are my one-offs. I want to make sure these guys are the key parts of my stacks. Should I choose the White Sox or should I choose the Astros or Minnesota? These are the guys that I want in those lineups, right? Comes all the way down here to Juan Soto, Brandon Crawford. Of course, these are not names that should be unfamiliar. Giancarlo Stanton's back on the list. Should not be unfamiliar to you, right? These are names that should be on the highlight reels. It's not rocket science. It doesn't have to be made difficult. These guys are swinging a bat really, really well right now. They're seeing the ball really, really well. And if they run into a little softer pitching tonight, or even an ace makes a mistake to them, they should smash it. Pretty simple. So now that I've got that stuff done, that's the routine. I take these into the optimizer and I start boosting the projections here and the little smiley faces, right? If I can get it to stay still. And that's what's going to then bring these guys forward in my lineup building when I'm using that optimizer, making 50, 100, 150 lineups, whatever it is. That allows me to focus on those guys, and that's why. Now, just like every other routine that you go through, it's going to have its good days, it's going to have its bad days. It's going to have streaks, 4 or 5 or 6 days in a row that are just duds. That happens. So when we're talking about the cash game build and we're going to build by ownership, the large part of what I would do is I would sort this ownership here, and I'm going to be trying to build the highest ownership lineup that I can. Okay. Now, one way to do it is to use the tool I was telling you about, and that would be the chalkboard tool. We haven't talked about this for a couple of weeks, but the DFS chalkboard tool, if we're using FanDuel, we're looking at the ownerships. What I'm going to look for, an easy to spot method for cash game plays, is I can look at position by position and I can start looking for which of these guys is a key at his position. We talk about positional scarcity and all this sort of stuff. Look at these guys. Not a big drop off here in the outfield per se, because there's a lot of choices, right? But a Danny Santana at 16% at 2,100 is probably pretty key, or a Kyle Schwarber, or even a Kirillov. These guys are probably pretty important if we're using an expensive pitcher like a Scherzer or a Rogers. Scherzer has a big ownership gap here, so he's probably the cash game pitcher. A lot of people are going to use Rogers. So again, if you want to take a little bit of a risk, you might use a Trevor Rogers. You might feel like he's the better pitcher, or that it might flip the slate a little bit on its head. And we'll talk about that when we talk about the pivot. But what we're looking for right now, if we're just eating chalk, Scherzer, look at the depth. If you're going to use a catcher, which most time we don't, you're using Gary Sanchez. But if you're using a first baseman, there's not as much of a gap here. There is between LeMahieu and Santana, but Santana was so cheap. You might save him for the outfield with multi-position eligibility, and that would free up a bigger gap from LeMahieu down to Sano. Sano's not typically a cash game, cash safe type of batter anyway. So you might, and Kirillov is an outfielder. So now you're down to Abreu at 8%. 26 to 8% is a big drop off. You're going to probably have to use DJ LeMahieu, who's typically a very good cash game player anyway. Second base, 26 down to 16, down to 12. So this may not be as important. I wouldn't probably, see, I'm trying to look for where that gap. The gap's huge here if I get rid of Santana and use him in the outfield. If not, I could use Santana here, and then I could use LeMahieu over here at second base. So however I'm going to try, Urshela's probably going to be important here at third base with the gap here, because these guys again start to blend together. And then 16, 16, 13, whatever. These guys are probably all pretty interchangeable. You might use a Polanco for value because there's your big gap difference. I'm looking at a bunch of $3,000 guys. There's a $2,700 guy I can slot in there that's getting as much ownership as anybody else. So that allows me to save some money if these things are all created equal. And then I can dive into the outfield, probably pick up a Stanton, probably pick up an Alvarez, a Danny Santana, use him there, a Schwarber, whatever, depending, again, on how much money I needed to free up. And you, as you're building, you watch, as you slot those guys in, you kind of target which of these guys am I going to start building with first. Those become your quote-unquote core plays. And these are the guys that you're largely non-negotiable on that you are then building everything else around. If somebody had to leave your lineup, it's going to be somebody else before it's these guys, right? Those are the core plays. Those are the guys that you're the most certain, the most set on building around. Another way that we could do this is we could add these numbers up. And if I call up the old calculator here, we can plug in 36.5 for Scherzer. We can plug in 26.2 for LeMahieu, right? No matter where we use them. 16.9 there or 16.5, call it 16.5 for Polanco. Pretend we used LeMahieu over there. Urshela 27.8%. And we want to watch that we're not taking too many Yankees. Gleyber Torres is fine, but if I use Polanco for the savings, I'm at 16.5. And now I'm into the outfield. And I'm sitting on, essentially, probably would take a stand. So call it 24.5. And then we've used Santana over there at first base, I believe. Nelson Cruz, Juan Soto, call it 13.2. And then let's take Schwarber at 12.5. I don't know if I can build that lineup or not, but I'm sitting at around 173, 174 in terms of the number of the ownership that I can build. So I'm going to come over here into the domination station, right? And I'm going to start it at about 175, 180, something like that. And I'm going to see, will it build me, 5 to 10 lineups with a couple of unique players, maybe shift up a little bit of randomness just to get it going. Will it build me these lineups? Will it build me 10 of them? If the answer is yes, then I can go higher with this slider bar. This slider bar right here is what's controlling how chalky my ownerships are. I can force that in there. It looks like it did build 10, right? 10 lineups. So I can go a little higher. Let's see if I can get up to 200. Because what I did myself might not be ideal just using the chalkboard. I might need to use some of this to see if I can force an even chalkier build into place, right? So now we're in there again. If I take this number, sort by percentage of ownership, come up to about 204. Let's go up higher to 220. See if we can get 10 lineups this way. Nope, can't get it. So we're probably at about the 205 mark, okay? So if we're at 204, 205, call it 200 for this particular example. Now what I can do is I can go in here and I can go back to the chalkboard and I can put in Trevor Rogers. Or I can start taking some of these other guys that I might want to use instead that are somewhat chalky but not all the way chalky. And then I can add those numbers up on my calculator and see how they compare to the 204 or 205 that we were getting. Okay, so I'm going to make slightly different choices that are going to give me a lower lineup score. They're not going to give me that 204. They might give me a 195. If I'm close, if I'm within about 10% of that 204, so really within about 180 and higher, then I'm sitting at about the best I can build. These are all going to be very, very chalky plays. If I look really, yeah, see, Scherzer was all in. If I swap him out and put in Trevor Rogers, this number is going to come down by 10 percentage points anyway, so I'm going to be building in the 190 range. That makes him a viable cash game pivot. He may not be the cash game pitcher, but it makes him a viable pivot. Another thing that you could do is you could just drop this number to say 170. Get into that 10 to 15% range, build 10 more lineups, and see how those come up. They're not going to build for the highest ownership projection at this point. They're building for the highest point total because that's what this optimizer is still using, is these fantasy points per dollar and such. So you're kind of tricking it to build for at least this amount of chalk. It may not want to go higher than this because it may find higher fantasy point lineups by getting just underneath that radar. And that's the beauty of this system. See it down to 171 here. That's the beauty. Now you can sit here and look at these lineups that are close to chalk, but just a little under chalk. 3 Yankees, a couple of Nationals, right? But it's still using the Sotos and the Schwarbers. It's still using the Polancos, the LeMahieu's, the Scherzers. It's still using those guys to give you those key plays. This one switches up with some Toronto, and I wouldn't stack 4 guys in a cash game. So that top lineup really isn't too bad. It's a 3x2. It's set up pretty well. It's using those chalky plays, but it's just a little under the radar. If we come down here and look again, scan through these lineups, pick one you like. If you want to switch things up a little bit, use this technique to get a little under that radar and still play those cash games, or maybe even a league type of play. And this type of stuff we review all day long at dfsarmy.com, where we coach you into becoming a better player and teach you different techniques to get up there on the leaderboards. Give me a shout out here in the description or the comments and we'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Peace.